I had the opportunity to see the death process pretty close. Many people that I worked on, because I was on an emergency response team in the hospital, many of those patients died as a result of their injuries. But I just felt like there was something that wasn't always being fulfilled in those situations. I can recall several instances of medical professionals notifying a family member that that family member had passed or died. It was kind of left at that. That's kind of all they had to say.
Warning. The podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised. The Role of Coroner with Jessamine County, Kentucky Coroner Michael Hughes, Part 1 of 2. Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast. I am Wendy.
And I'm David. Well, Wendy, we just completed a fantastic interview with three amazing people. I'm excited to get this out. I fell in love with it the entire time I started to put it together and post. Why don't you tell the listeners what they're about to hear in this two-part series?
Well, in this series, we're going to go over what involves the role of a coroner. And I'll tell you, I was really amazed at what this job entails. I had no idea.
Likewise, I'd worked with coroners and deputy coroners for several years at the police department when I was in the homicide unit and had an understanding, a practical understanding of what it was like as far as their duties go. But in this interview, Michael Hughes, who's the coroner in Jessamine County, Kentucky, really opened my eyes to a lot of intricacies that I wasn't aware of.
Yeah, me either. I guess most people, probably like us, thought, not to be disrespectful, but you think that the role of a coroner is just to come pick up the deceased person. Really, that's all I thought it was. I learned it's so much more than that. The fact that they really own that crime scene before anybody else does. I had no idea of that.
Yeah, exactly. The other things, too, is that we get the audience to hear is some of the technical things, like what are the qualifications required to be a Kentucky coroner? And how do you get into the coroner's office? That's an interesting thing, too. The guest, we also, of course, had not only Michael Hughes, but his wonderful wife, Olivia Hughes, who is a volunteer in his office, which is what we're going to hear, too. This is like a partnership that I've never heard of before. And then, of course, then we had Cassie Robinson, who is one of his handful of deputy coroners. And together they talked about the training and the certifications that they have to complete, the importance of relationships both in the coroner's office and outside of the office, their general duties and responsibilities. And I think that's what you were alluding to, was those things that I never knew that they did. And then I think, and this will speak to you too, is probably the most unique thing is the aftercare that they provide for families and friends of deceased people in the wake of this death and how long that extends. And there's even a really neat story of a family unification that would have never occurred if the deputy coroner, Cassie Robinson, wasn't pursuing assisting the family so much. And we'll leave that up to the listeners to hear that.
Yeah, and one final thing I'd like to add, if listeners have not heard the podcast we did on the murder of my best friend, Angela Wooldridge, that's how I came to know Michael and Cassie and Olivia. You know, you just said how they stick by your side after the death of someone, and they really do. I just hope that our listeners tune in, hear what these coroners and deputy coroners and Michael's wife put into this job, and it really is their heart and soul. Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast. Today we have with us the Jessamine County Coroner's Office, that's out of Nicholasville, Kentucky. Mr. Michael Hughes, thank you for joining us. How are you today, sir?
I'm very good. Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, sir. Thank you for coming. With us also, we have Miss Olivia Hughes, Michael's wife. How are you, Miss Olivia?
I'm fine, thank you.
And we have Cassie Robinson, Deputy Coroner with Jessamine County Coroner's Office. Miss Cassie, how are you?
I'm great, thanks.
And David. you're here again. How are you?
Yeah, I'm a perennial favorite, I guess. I'm doing fine. And I'm excited to hear these people tell everybody what it's like to be a coroner.
Well, with that, let's begin. Michael, again, thank you for coming. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your role in this Jessamine County Coroner's Office.
Well, thank you for asking. I was elected to this coroner's office for the first time in 2010, and I've been repeatedly reelected each time. And each term is for 4 years. So this means I'm on my 12th year right now.
Well, that's awesome. You have obviously a lot of experience, and I know you're an icon around here. Olivia, I know also you have a large role in this department as well. I've had contact with you myself not too long ago over an incident involving my best friend, and you were the first person that I talked to, and you were exceptional and very welcoming and warming in speaking to me. So why don't you tell me, aside of taking those intake calls and calling back friends, families, whatever, tell the listeners what else your role is and what you do there with Coroner's Office.
Well, my role has always been a volunteer for the office, and I encompass just about everything that the coroner does, the deputy coroners do, and administrative work. I think the thing that God really led me to is actually speaking to the families and the decedents' loved ones after that they've passed away. And I feel like I have made a lot of friends in doing this role.
Well, again, I know you were certainly a warm welcome for me when I was going through what I was going through, not really knowing which end was up, and you really helped to guide that in a great direction. So thank you for being there for me. Cassie, I can't leave you out. I didn't get to talk to Michael, but you were exceptional, and you and I have spent literally hours on the phone talking. And with your role, I'm assuming as a deputy coroner, and correct me if I'm wrong, you assist Michael, but if Michael's not available, then you assume his role. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. So I'm guessing in your role, you also received the same training for, what is that, Department of Criminal Justice?
Yes. We received the same training through the DOCJT.
So you have the same role as him in that you go onto the crime scene and you do investigate that scene and you determine a cause of death, I'm assuming. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And it is an investigation. We have to investigate to figure out what,
where, how, why,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
who.
Yep.
Very, very neat. So you both, all of you have really, really great roles in what you do. I don't know how each of you do it. It's I commend you for what you do. I certainly couldn't, but I know behind the scenes you do your professional role, I should say, but I think it's notable that you all reach out and spend the time that you do with families and friends because, people want answers, especially people like me. I love details, and I want, as you recall on the phone when you and I've spent, I want every detail, and I want to start from the very beginning, and I don't want you to leave out one thing. And if you do, I backtrack and I get you right back there. So thank you all for doing that and being there for people. I don't know how you do what you do, but I'm grateful that you all do it for Jessamine County here. Now, Michael, I'm assuming is Cassie your only deputy, or Cassie, does he work you like the only deputy, or do you all have more?
We have a whole team. It's not just me. We have a whole team
We actually have 3 deputies. And the reason we have that many is often cases require the presence of 2 of us. We're very fortunate in Jessamine County to have the assistance of the fire department when we need lift assists because of an extremely large decedent. And of course, we work hand in hand with law enforcement and emergency medical personnel. In the city, that's Nicholasville Police Department or Wilmore Police Department. And in the county, it's Jessamine County Coroner's Office. But the other reason we have 3 deputies is so that we could fairly rotate the schedule so nobody has an excessively large amount of call days. And when we do call, our deputies don't have to remain in the office. They can go about their lives, whatever they want to do, and they stay in contact by telephone with our central dispatch office.
Who are the other deputies? What are their names so we can get them on the record? I think people would be interested to know.
Other than Cassie, we have Stephanie Manley and Paul Warner.
Gotcha. And of course, they've had the same training through Department DOCJT, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
So tell me a little bit too about when you said call days. What's and Cassie, jump in here too. What's that look like? Because like you said, they don't have to be in the office. They can be bouncing around in their normal life. What's a typical period look like when somebody's on call?
Well, I think I'm going to let Cassie answer that because she's on call more than I am. I make myself available to all the deputies every single day that I possibly can, and I therefore don't take a routine call pattern. I feel that it's more appropriate for me to make sure that what they're doing is what we need to have done and to follow up with them. But I also try to get involved in a situation where we have a special type of a case, such as an infant death, that requires a bit more investigation. That's not to say that my deputies can't do that, but at that point I go there to assist them.
That makes sense. Back in the business, we called those red balls, the ones that we're going to need more attention and need and everything. And I think if I'm tracking you right, I like the way you do that because the problem too, that if the boss is there all the time, people don't learn. That's probably a really good way. And plus, let's all be honest, most of us don't want the boss breathing down our neck when we work. And I'm not saying that goes on with you all, but I think we're all human beings when it comes to that.
Well, I have to agree with that. I'd like to throw a plug in for all my deputies because we have such a camaraderie between them that they work together so well. And I've never experienced this before in this office, but of these 3 deputies, they're all willing to help each other, even if they're not on call. They'll make themselves available to go with the one that is on call. And that's almost just unheard of for people to want to do that, take on that extra workload. But they're also involved and interested in what we do. And they've seen the results of being there for families, the way they can bless families with their conversation, with their prayer, with answered questions. I think you found out that even with Cassie, she stayed in touch by telephone with Wendy, and that's nothing really different for Cassie. It's just kind of typical for the way we operate.
That takes service to a whole different level, right? Servant leadership for sure, and that's commendable.
Absolutely. Thank you for recognizing that.
Because that's the whole thing when people have a loss is just a dark avenue. And we've discussed it on this podcast many times through the role of victim advocacy when you represent surviving victims, especially in violent crime. But in any kind of death, the confusion that sets in and the idea that they need somebody to walk them through that's excellent work. And I'll compliment you on this too. What you're describing is an excellent team. And teams just don't happen. Teams are made up of people that have a strong why, the same goals and objectives, and the leadership that lets them form into a team. So I agree. You don't see good teams everywhere you go.
That's true.
In my career, I can count them on less than all the fingers on one hand. And I always tell people when you're in a good team environment, eat it up and enjoy it because you don't know when you're going to get it again. But it does make work fun. Cassie, does it make it more enjoyable?
Absolutely. And I also think that we have a good team too because Michael's been a great leader. When you were talking about not having your boss breathing down your neck and giving you room to grow and learn, that's exactly what Michael did. I mean, I learned the foundation of an investigation. And then when it was time to kind of get out of the nest, he would just say, go ahead, go on your own. You've got it. And then, but he's always there. Even to this day, if I have a question, it could be something really trivial. He'll listen and give me a very educated answer. And he's built my confidence through this whole process as the years go by. And I think that's because he's let us just kind of get out and learn and figure it out.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that's important things. Well, and let me run too when we're talking about the team, because Olivia, make sure, I don't know if we really glazed over this or not, but if the audience is really clear on the idea that Michael and Olivia are married. Did we really cover that in the beginning?
Well, I did say his wife, but we didn't get into that. Yeah. And I know where you're going. I'm wondering the same. How is it to be married to Michael, to a coroner that has a job like this? Is that what you're wondering? Yeah,
and also as far as the team, because during the intros, I didn't know you volunteered. I thought you were, which I was like blown away with. I think it's a neat thing. You definitely are part of that team too. So tell us a little bit about what it's like to be married to somebody who has a job like this, that with the weight that comes with it. And then more so, I'd like to learn more about how you partner with that so well and get so deeply involved.
Well, we partner so well because since we've been married, we've always been a team in each corporation or business that we've operated. And the first one being we were on call 24/7, just much like the coroner's office, 365 days a year. And we had to be a team together in order to run that smoothly and effectively and be available for those living patients that we were responsible for. As he journeyed into the coroner's office, there really wasn't much difference in our time spent away from each other because I became part of that team as a volunteer, assisting Michael in whatever realm that he needed assistance in. And spending so much years together in other businesses, we both could almost tell you what the other person's thinking or going to say next. And being available 24/7 is very difficult situation for all of us, not just me and Michael, but the other deputies, because you get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and take a call, and then you finish that death call, and then you go on to your other job that you have to be in at maybe 9 o'clock in the morning or whatever time. But Michael and I have just tried to smooth things out the best we can and play off of each other. And I think that's what has made it work so well.
I think what she's just described to you is the fact that she's smarter and brighter than I am. And everything I get into would probably fail if I didn't have her standing there backing me up and showing me the right way to go.
Well, speaking of that past career, why don't you share a little bit about that? You said you all did this, whatever this job is, also full-time. What was that job?
We owned Lane Medical Incorporated, which was a durable medical equipment company. Our main focus was on oxygen patients that we supplied in patients' homes via a doctor's prescription. And with putting that oxygen unit in a person's home, we also had to make sure that they had a backup system in case there was a power failure or a malfunction of the machine. And it was our job in the middle of the night, if someone called and said their power was down or the machine was malfunctioned, that we had to get up and go out to their home and do the repair or reteach them how to use the backup system for their oxygen. So we did that for about 25 years and are still doing that same 24/7, 365 days a year, which a lot of people don't understand. You miss a lot of holidays, you'll miss a lot of vacations, you miss a lot of those special things in your family's lives because when you're on call, duty calls.
Not only do you miss those things, Olivia, but the weight you pack. Because again, in the business you're in, is you're not there because everything's going terrific. As I remember I had somebody in training say that one time. It's the same thing with police. You're not going to somebody's house because, I still remember Billy Fryer said this, you're not going to somebody's house because their kid had a birthday. You just went to their house because they woke up and the child was dead. You're missing those things, and I've lived that for a long time. I can tell you now I really don't miss it, and the 15th of the month club is a wonderful place to be as a retiree. But it's not just that; it's the emotional burden that comes with that and carrying that there. That's a big deal.
Absolutely. You just your brain is constantly thinking, when is the phone going to ring? And you have to be prepared to go. You know, you can't spend 40 or 50 minutes and say, I'll be there when I get there. You have to just pick up and go.
Exactly. It's much more than just moving people around, and even more than the investigation that Cassie talked about of dotting those I's and crossing those T's. And that's what we'll continue to talk more about too, is how you all minister to those people that are left behind and actually kind of take them through that dark period as best you can, which is good stuff.
That business that she was talking about was more or less a mom and pop operation. We would have a couple of young people work with us to help us make some deliveries. But on the other hand, most of those calls, the emergency calls, were done by us. So it really was being on that call situation or system for us 24/7. And I'd like to throw in, because I know it's going to be a question you're going to be curious about. That probably was the biggest preparation that my wife had for the coroner's office, because she learned compassion, how to express her compassion and sympathy and understanding and sharing and love for people, because we had to do the same thing. We would get to know our patients so well because we went into their home every month to check on their oxygen equipment. And we would have dinner with some of them, and we would just sit on the porch and talk. And so many times we had to attend funerals for those very people that we got to know, which is very similar to what we do in the coroner's office. So that was a preparation in and of itself in dealing with the sorrow and whether it's grief or just despair of not knowing what to do, and being able to be there to answer those questions for people when they don't know what to do next.
Good point. Sometimes we're preparing ourselves for things we don't know we're preparing ourselves for, and then it pays off. That's providence for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's shift a little bit, if this is okay. Where I'm going next is you talked about doing that. Start with Michael. When did you decide that, hey, I want to be a county coroner? And was there something that moved you in that direction? And then what did you start doing to get ready to run for that office? Because that's something we're going to cover too, is that we've talked about that before, that Kentucky coroners are elected. One of the reasons I'm really pleased to do the podcast with you is an election is upon us, and we'll talk about that more through the show, and that you're running for re-election again. And this is a good opportunity to hear more about you and your family and your staff, your fantastic staff. What moved you to become a coroner? Was it one thing or several?
I think it was a culmination of a growth process from my medical experience, which began in the United States Navy, where I was a hospital corpsman, was the name for a medic in the Navy. And we also provided service to the Marine Corps, because as most people know, the Marine Corps is a branch of the Navy. So that's how I ended up being attached to two different branches. But throughout that, I got to serve and work with and help heal and treat veterans who were wounded in Vietnam. Some of them were my friends, people that I actually went to hospital corps school with, and they got sent to Vietnam. I didn't, fortunately, but I was there for quite a few of them when they returned, Great Lakes Naval Hospital and several other places. I had the opportunity to see the death process pretty close. Many people that I worked on, because I was on an emergency response team in the hospital, many of those patients died as a result of their injuries. But I just felt like there was something that wasn't always being fulfilled in those situations. I can recall several instances of medical professionals notifying a family member that that family member had passed or died. It was kind of left at that. That's kind of all they had to say. Well, he didn't make it. Or, sorry, we did everything we could do. Or, there was nothing else we could do. Sorry for your loss. And then sort of disappear. And I remember being able to look in people's eyes, people's faces that were, some would cry, some wouldn't because they were in shock. But it was always a feeling to me that they were looking around saying, what comes next? What do I do next? What am I supposed to do? I've never been in this situation before, especially a young, brand new widow. And it's like I wasn't in a position at that time as a corpsman to approach that person. That was the doctor's, quote unquote, role to do that. And I thought there's got to be a better way. Surely everybody isn't just dropping this like this and letting these people flounder around. I just felt if I ever have an opportunity to be on the other side of that and do it the right way, I just felt I have an inherent ability to do it the right way. Nobody trained me. Nobody taught me what I need to do or say or put an arm around somebody or give them the biggest hug I've ever given anybody. It was there. And I really wanted to exercise that desire and ability. So I got to know several coroners in my hometown in Ohio, even in Kentucky, became friends with them, and I started to learn about the coroner role. And the first thing I learned is how unlike it is CSI and the shows, Quincy and the shows we see on TV, where you don't see very much of the part that I was talking about. When I realized that, hey, I qualified to be a coroner, and I found out the way that you do it is you run for the office. And that's exactly what I did. And I won on my first time out, and I've won the succeeding 2 times, and I'm hoping to win this time.
We are too. And Olivia, when this big life change, right? What was your impression when the idea came up and moving? How did you feel about going in that direction?
As always, in any endeavor that Michael wanted to pursue, I was 100% on board with him because I felt like it was a passion that he wanted to do, and working alongside with him with patients in the ER or whatever realm we worked with patients, I felt that same sense of I could reach out to these people just by giving them a hug, a smile, telling them it's going to get better and they're going to pull through surgery. And when he asked about us discussing the coroner role, it was 100%, let's go.
I have to say, though, that I'm not trying to, how can I say, take advantage of the situation or whatever for being a Christian, but we include prayer in everything we do. And we did pray pretty hot and heavy about it because we both asked ourselves, is this really something we want to do? And I felt yes, just based on those situations that I described to you before. If it just makes a difference in a handful of people's lives, that's a handful of people. We followed God's will there, and we like to think we're still doing that.
It sounds every bit like a calling to me when it speaks to you as a vocation and a benediction that way. It truly is. Well, Cassie, what are the things about the coroner work that drew you to it?
Well, actually, a lot of what Michael just talked about kind of rings true to me because I experienced it firsthand. I lost my husband in a car accident 11 years ago. It was out of state, and I just got a phone call from a coroner in another state. And it was kind of this cold, just simple conversation. There wasn't I think Michael may have just taken office, but someone from my husband's work came to my house. But then they left. And that was just kind of like, okay, well, here you go. And you're lost in this kind of weird space where you don't know what direction, you don't know what to do. I've never thought about a funeral home ever. So that plays a huge role in how I deal with or work with families now, because I think it's a really important time, which funeral directors do a wonderful job once you establish a funeral home. But there's this really weird kind of interim where you're not even thinking about that. You're just kind of lost. And so I always tell them, I'm yours until you don't need me. So any questions you have, whether it's who's going to feed my dog or who's going to meet ServPro to come clean my house, or I just feel like you need somebody to kind of hold your hand through that process until you get your feet underneath you and let it sink in what just happened.
I will have to say, I recall when my best friend passed, Olivia called me and said, Cassie drove by and saw cats outside, and she's wondering if all of her cats are in. And I just thought that was so sweet that you drove by and instantly thought, who's taking care of these cats?
Yeah, I wanted to make sure everything was still secure in the house because, after something terrible like that happens, a property will just sit, and I just want to make sure. And I saw this little cat just pawing at the door trying to get in, and I was so worried.
That was just so sweet of you all, for you to reach out to Olivia and Olivia to reach out to me. And,
yeah,
most people don't think of that. And for you to drive by and think about it, I think it says so much for not just our little hometown and that hometown feel, but for you all as an agency to think so much about the people you serve as something as small as a cat, let alone the people.
Yeah. And I think that's why we make such a good team, because Michael and Olivia were called to do that. They innately just had that in them to do that. And then I think mine comes from experiencing it firsthand in a situation where it didn't really go the way I would have liked it to go. And then I had an opportunity to make it different for other people. That combined with all of our team working hard together, I feel like we cover every aspect of the grieving process, the initial shock of the grieving process, to make it as less scary as possible, as least scary as possible.
I like to believe that living in Jessamine County and serving the community here, this size of a community, with the diversity that we do have and the just the people that are here, there's love here, and it's the right size place for me to be doing this. I wouldn't want to be doing it in a city like Lexington. Don't disparage Lexington at all. I love the city, but I believe that it would be so much more difficult to have that personal touch there than here, and only because there's so much happening there. They have so many cases ongoing constantly. To be able to stay up with everybody and every situation that you have an active case on would be extremely difficult. So this just seems to be a great match, not only for Olivia and I, but for our entire team.
Well, and I think also it shows in your work. It's, it truly shows in your the way you reach out to the community. And, and it goes without saying, that's likely why you've been elected for as many terms as you have. The community realizes what a good team that we have here. And, I don't know if there's other people running or not. I don't know, but I certainly think, for this upcoming election, people need to certainly reflect on the great things that your team has brought to our community when they're looking into who am I going to elect. I don't know, maybe people don't even think that, but, I know that my experience was really just top notch with you all. And I had never talked to a coroner, and just the fact that you all spent as much time reaching out to me and calling me. And Cassie, bless your heart, your phone died once and we had to resume the call, and your dog wanted to go out and your kid was calling, and I'm like, mine too. And so, I just don't, and nothing against other departments, but for that one-on-one, for you all to reach out to people, that just really says a lot. And I think that's why our little town of Nicholasville, Kentucky loves having Michael Hughes and his team as our coroner.
Well, I can't thank you enough for saying that. That recognition is, we don't feel like it's well-deserved because we don't feel like heroes or doing anything, that we're doing anything extra. We actually, my personal feeling is if I didn't do the things that I do, that I would be walking away from the job unfinished. And I feel that the people that are working with me feel the same way. I hope that I could say, well, I can say, I hope that that they believe that we've made a difference in their lives as far as how to do this. Sorry to get tongue-tied there, but
let's go back into the mechanics of this a little bit. When you get elected, and we talked in the beginning about the training everybody's had, the listeners might remember when we interviewed Dr. Greg Davis on forensic pathology. Greg was really clear to talk about the idea that one of the reasons he came back to this Kentucky itself and this area to practice his trade was because of the respect he had for the coroner system, and because of the training and the quality of the people that are here. He preferred that. The relationships that he had when he was a medical examiner were much better than other places he worked. And the training obviously played a big deal in it. What's an overview of the kind of training that a coroner in Kentucky completes at Department of Criminal Justice Training? What does that look like? Just an overview of some of the topics and things like that, or how much time is spent at it?
Well, they always have a variety of training topics. Every year there is a repeat of most of them so that new coroners and new deputies can get the same training, but they try to add something new every year. The mandatory requirement for annual coroner training is 18 hours, and that usually consists of at least 1 2-day seminar per year. And they also have a coroner's conference annually that completes that same role, satisfies the same number of hours. Our initial training is simply a 40-hour course, which lasts for 5 days, to teach us the basic, and I do mean basic ins and outs of the way an office works, the way a coroner works, the way a deputy works, the KRSs or Kentucky Revised Statutes that apply to coroners, responsibilities and rights, the basics of forensic science. It is basic. I feel it's woefully inadequate, simply not anybody's fault. The Kentucky Coroners Association does a great job in providing this for us, but it's a minimum stepping stone to get into the field. Then it's how much you push yourself to get the additional training that you need, or how much the coroner will push the deputies to get additional training. It's never seems to be quite enough to me to take the minimum. I've never been satisfied since I've been the coroner of taking merely one course a year to satisfy the hours requirements. As a matter of fact, one of our lead instructors was referring to me at one time as a perpetual student, because he would see me show up for every course they had. I've accumulated over 650 hours of continuing education since I've been in the office. So we like to think that the subjects that are covered are all appropriate in one way or another. I'd like to mention, as a matter of fact, that a constitutionally elected coroner is also a constitutionally elected peace officer. That means we have all the rights and privileges of any law enforcement officer in our state. As a result of that, we are able to do what's necessary, and that's why the rules were set up as they are, so that we could obtain whatever information we might need in the process of investigating a death. That means being able to demand medical records from hospitals, doctors' offices, pharmacies, clinics, whoever it might be, so that we can get into that without having to get search warrants and that sort of thing just for that basic information. Again, most of that was set up so that the system could help us find out what we need to do. The system Greg was so pleased with is not a system where the medical examiner employs an individual to be a coroner. It's where the coroners literally, hate to say run the show, but we are our own boss, other than the people who elect us, of course. But whenever we feel that we need an autopsy, we are the ones who send the individual, the decedent, to the medical examiner's office and tell them that we want them to do an autopsy. And they in turn do that. So their purpose was fulfilled through the Kentucky Revised Statutes as being available to assist the coroner in determining manner and cause of death. And we have worked so perfectly in harmony with the medical examiners in obtaining this. They're more than happy to work with us, to train us, to add to what we already know, which is scant compared to what they know as fully trained forensic pathologists. But working together, we get the job done. We can understand the language that we each use. We follow the same protocols so that there's no wondering what we were doing and what they wanted. As they say, we're their eyes and ears in the field.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed out the peace officer thing. A lot of people aren't aware of that. And Wendy had alluded to the investigative roles on this, and I've probably pointed out in some other shows that in Kentucky, at a death scene, the coroner is the lead law enforcement entity at that scene. They control it. They have every bit of control. Externally, when I worked in Lexington, it didn't look like that because, you have a scene. It's regarded as suspicious. A crime lab pulls up. People bail out of vehicles like circus clowns, the cops do, and they're all over the scene. The reality of it, though, is that there's a relationship with that county coroner where you're invited in, either explicitly in that event or there's an agreement. But I always reminded people that that's not the police department scene, is there's a coordinated effort on that. And yes, like Cassie said, is that most of the investigations are completed by the coroner's office. The only time law enforcement's brought in is when it's going to be overwhelming or get to the idea that we may be going to grand juries and trials and things like that.
And I feel like, too, in Nicholasville, we've got a really good relationship with NPD and the sheriff's office. We work together They ask us questions. We ask them questions. We have an open dialogue, an open line of communication, which makes it a pleasant scene to work on because we all can just work as a really big team.
We're equally as closely involved with Wilmore Police Department.
That's right.
And, if I could add to that a little bit more specifically, I find that I don't like to elaborate too much on that because it's kind of like watching the old TV show where the FBI comes in and tells the cops back off, and the cops hate the FBI, and the FBI seems to hate the cops, at least in the movies. I've always been a person that believes that I can get more accomplished with sugar than I can vinegar. So one of the things I've tried to do is develop a stronger rapport than the coroner's office has ever had in the past with our law enforcement officials. With EMS as well, one of the best things we can do for them is to show up on time, so that, in a timely manner, so they don't have to be sitting around waiting. But with the law enforcement, I've had several police chiefs say, "Hey, this is your scene, I'm backing off." And I just didn't like the sounds of that. And I said, well, no, I don't agree with that completely. This is our scene. This is a team effort. The scene is yours. The decedent is mine. That's the best way I felt about it, so that I could, in a cheerful way, if I can use that term, express what the rules are in the KRS, such as when the coroner's, until the coroner is present, no one shall move the body, no one shall take anything from the body, change positions, etc., etc. And we've had a few growing experiences with that in trying to remind certain police departments, if you don't have to, don't touch the weapon, if we think it's a suicide, for example, because that kind of taints our view of the scene. Which hand was the weapon in? Where was the weapon positioned? How far from the body, or was it on the body, or whatever? So we've worked with the police departments and the sheriff's office to develop that rapport. And sometimes people who have done things another way for so many years are resistant to change, that. And I like to think that we've made significant improvements along that line. It's not perfect yet, but I think sometimes if the police academies would get more involved in the role of a coroner on scene and what their responsibilities are, that would help us tremendously. And I don't know whether that is or not, but I've asked numerous officers how much time they receive training on coroners, and they look at each other and say, "I don't remember any." And that bothers me a little bit. So I'm always hopeful that we'll see a change in that.
Yeah, I think it's a passed down. I know when I came through and I had 28 years on, it's a passed down knowledge and through experience, but I don't ever remember in the academy getting anything like that. And it is about relationships, because I never saw a antagonistic relationship in my career at all. It was always probably one of the neatest things to watch is just the coordinated effort of nobody had a head in the game, and it was actually, in my experience, it was good. But I understand what you're talking about on those miscommunications or non-understandings, because typically for police, it's the antagonism has never been with the coroner. It's always been the fire department, right? What they call them, the evidence destruction unit and stuff like that. And most of that is even based on mythology, the things that are passed down and are accurate. And it was funny because when you were talking, Cassie got really animated when you were talking about moving guns and stuff like that. And I'm thinking back of myself, just some of the strange things I've seen at scenes, and we don't have to dig in because it could embarrass people, on things that were relocated when they didn't need to be. And I'll leave it at that. Yeah. Anything from, and again, when I investigated cases, I was like you, and I was like Cassie. You don't want anything messed with. Medical treatment's a whole different ball of wax. I can argue that, but I just remember having conversations with people about really have to put a sheet over them. They're in their home. We're okay. There's nobody traipsing through here and whatever. I bet it was funny. I was cracking up watching Cassie, and the audience can't hear her, but she was extremely animated when you were talking. And I'm thinking, you know what? We probably got some war stories.
Mm-hmm.
We probably got a few stories to tell.
Absolutely.
That'd be for another day, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But it does come down to relationships. And you made a good point too, that and I've always been big on this, that TV and movies really give the public a bad representation of what every bit of this looks like. Even the shows we grew up with, you talked about, none of them are accurate. And that's why we like doing this podcast and taking people, especially right now, having coroners and deputy coroner and a deputy coroner in the room. It is so different than what TV and movies. And I think, unfortunately, when people have a loss, that unexpected loss, they revert back to what they think they've seen on TV, and there's part of the confusion again. But it's nothing like, none of this whole world that all of us have worked in or are working in is nothing like what we see in TV.
Well, I did want to ask, and maybe some people wonder, like I wonder, because if you not ever had dealt with a coroner, you know what the role is because you hear, or TV tells you what it is. But how does it happen from the beginning? And anybody who listens to this podcast, I always want to know from the very beginning what happened. Are you all notified of a death, or how do you all know where to go? And then what do you do next? And what do you do next?
Well, if I can interject on this, and Cassie, you can add to it, please. Our dispatch system is in touch with all first responders, and I like to consider us last responders, but they still consider us a first responder. They're the center where all the 911 phone calls come into. Based on the information that they get from whoever calls it in, which was mainly the address of the incident that's occurred, they will dispatch law enforcement, but they'll also notify, in the case of a potential death or a medical problem, EMS to be available on standby until the officers get a chance to check it out, and then they will radio back to dispatch by two-way radio what they have. And finally, to get us involved, the EMS, upon determining that the individual has succumbed or died in common lay terms by EKG tracings, they'll ask for 1100, which is our code number for the coroner's office. And then dispatch will contact us. We have a new system it's not brand new, but we're just getting it back up and running the way it should be. But they will actually give us a heads up. For example, when that officer calls that in to dispatch, that he has a potential code 500, which is a heart attack, cardiac arrest, they will notify us of the address, the circumstances, if they think it's a suspected code 500 or overdose or whatever, or a 46, which is an auto accident with injuries. They'll notify us so that heads up will get us prepared mentally for what we're going to encounter. It'll also often tell me if I need to be there, if I want to be there. They say we have a multiple injury or potential multiple fatality accident or 1046, then I know I want to go. It just works like that. Then we respond. We get in our vehicle, our van, emergency van, radio dispatch that we're en route to that address. Then, of course, upon arriving at the scene, we're usually met by EMS personnel and or law enforcement who gives us a synopsis of what the scene is all about. And then we proceed to go in, do our job.
Hey, you know there's more to the story, so go download the next episode like the true crime fan that you are.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform. as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, where you will find show notes, transcripts, information about the presenters, and much, much more. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, which is closed captions for those that are hearing impaired. Just search for the Murder Police Podcast and you will find us. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us 5 stars and a written review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast from. Make sure to subscribe to the Murder Police Podcast and set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.